I decided to give my frogs a new home, so I used one of my 90-litre tanks that wasn't being used much and converted it to a sort of marshy environment for them. First I washed off the substrate to make sure it was clean. There's a lot of dirt that comes out, so you have to make sure you wash it thoroughly until the water that comes off is clear. In the background you can hear my birds. So this is just the first wash. There's a lot of stuff coming out of the sand. So I gave it about 4 washes and it was clear on the 5th wash. So this was ready to be used. I then started shoveling it into my tanks. And of course, it snaps. Oh well. I put it across the bottom of the tank, sloping it up on the left side. This would be what I would root all the water plants in. I used rocks to support the raised section to give the frogs somewhere to stay up out of the water. And this was probably the hardest part of setting up the tank. I needed to make sure all the rocks were stable and that when each of the layers pressed up on top of each other it wouldn't collapse. So it took a lot of fiddling, but eventually I managed to fit it all into place. Here it is with some more sand covering the rocks, and that's the water I was going to add with some Azolla floating on top. I actually made a mistake here. I shouldn't have put more of the sand over the rocks because it needed another layer. As you can see here, the water level is far too low, so I've started adding more rocks on top. At this point I realized that I also needed some more rocks, so I rinsed some off. They're all sandstone, and took them to my room to put in the tank. The hardscape's starting to come together now, and after this layer of rocks, it's pretty much done. I just fitted some little pieces into the cracks to make sure it was all stable and that nothing would be falling through when I added the dirt and the sand over the top. And with the last bit of sand, I just put it over the top of the rocks. Here it is, pretty much done. I then added some more water to top it up. The plants in there actually weren't on purpose. I was actually going to give them to a friend, but I didn't have anywhere else to put them, so I just added them to the tank as well. And I think they make a decent decoration. I added some dirt over the top. This would help grow the plants that I had in there. So there are some Indian arrowhead, ferns, and some ficus. So these would be the plants that I just start off with. I'm going to add a lot more plants in the next few days. I'm just putting the plants into the substrate now, making sure the roots go in quite deeply to where the water is. I'm not too fussed about how it looks because I like the dense planted look. So they'll just go their own way, and if some don't like it that much, then they'll die off and other plants will take over. I realized the tank was lacking something, so I decided to add a piece of wood coming out from the stones and into the water. It also allowed me to add stuff onto the wood that you can't plant into the water. Here I added some air moss. It's actually a type of bromeliad. I also put in a stone for the frogs to hide under. They tend not to use this, unfortunately. They just hide under the leaves or on the glass sitting near the top of the tank, but I guess it looks alright. I also added a piece of bark with a cricket on it for the frogs to hide under, but I removed this later because it was just a waste of space that I could use planting, and the frogs didn't really use it. And this was the end of day one. I put some mondo grass in as well. I added the frogs. The tank isn't finished, but it was good enough for them for the moment. And it was getting quite late. These are two Tyler's tree frogs. There's also another frog, but I'll save him till the end of the video. It's a much more natural environment than I had them in before, and I like the look of this one a lot more. It's lacking a lot of aquatic plants, and I'm going to add those in over the next few days. And this is the next day. There's an elkhorn fern on the wood, as well as some other ferns, some spider plant, and some moss. And I also added a lot of aquatic plants, mainly grasses and rushes. This is a few days later and everything's grown in very nicely. The azolla's pretty much covered the surface of the water. And here is my other little tree frog. He's a very pretty little guy. And here's the finished tank. I like all of my tanks really well planted and sort of messy looking in a natural way. So if you like this style, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate the support. And there's a little guy again up the top.